We were taught that there were different classes of Christians: the bride of Christ, the wise virgins, the foolish virgins, the 144,000, the sheep, the goats, and so on. Where did these ideas come from, and are they part of historic Christianity?
Well, John, most of historic Christianity is kind of what we talked about with the different classes of believers. There's really only believers and unbelievers. There's really only saved and unsaved in historic Christianity. The idea of a class system in Christianity is not part of the historic teachings of the church. No. Now, I think most Christianity does believe that there is differences in rewards in heaven. So, some people maybe get a bigger reward for whatever reasons in heaven than other people. But as far as that amounting to a heavenly class system, no, nobody believed in that ever. No, I mean, as far as historic Christianity, where does that idea come from? Where does that stuff come from? Well, that actually evolved during the days of British Israelism. That is where that came from. You had people who, especially as it moved into the United States, were using this ideology to justify the maintenance of a class system, a class hierarchy, where you had an elite or ruling class, you had a working class, you had a slave class. And so in order to justify their class system here on earth, they went in the Bible and they invented a heavenly class system, right? Where, people would be servants for all eternity, or your reward in heaven would get to be someone else's slave. They came up with stuff like that. And so it was really just to justify an earthly class system. They invented the heavenly class system. Now, here's the thing. Like you go to the Bible, for example, Paul says, there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither male nor female, there's neither bond nor free. So you really get the picture in Scripture that there is no sort of a class system within the confines of Christianity. And then the last part he says there, Paul, there's neither bond nor free. There's no hierarchy in heaven. There's no bond or free. There's no higher ups that you report up to, right? That just does not exist in that way. There's not going to be a heavenly class system in heaven where you're reporting up a tree, up a pyramid structure, and the people at the bottom are the slaves to the people on top. And so that, like I said, evolved in British Israelism originally as part of justifications for, a class system, which was, the British Empire was very heavily class-based at the time. And then it went into overdrive with the Christian identity movement, right? The Christian identity movement took it and made it not just simply class, but racial in a lot of ways. And so the messages, teachings on those things do not really come from it don't come from Jehovah's Witnesses, it don't come from Adventism, it don't come from Baptists, or don't really come from any of those things. Where those ideas come from, the place that you found that they were pioneered and developed was within British Israelism and the Christian identity movement. And that is exactly where the message imported those ideas from.
I think understanding how deeply British Israelism influenced Pentecostalism and fundamentalist Christianity back in the early 1900s, I think that's key to understanding all of this, because whenever you mention the 144,000 and try to say that this is in any way, shape, or form applying to Christians, men who understand the covenants, usually who have been trained under schools of theology, but men who understand the covenants, just simply reading the book of Hebrews will tell you there's a old covenant, there's a new covenant, and the old covenant had failed, and now we've entered into a new covenant, that there's this separation. There is a clear separation between the old covenant law and the new covenant of grace. Men who tried to adopt this British Israelism idea, they did so by taking specific passages out of the Old Covenant that applied to the Jews, that applied to the children of Israel, and they tried to take each one of those passages and then point it to something in the 20th century. And by doing so, they ripped it out of context. A good example of this, William Branham did this too. He said that he was driving through Chicago and he had this vision of Nahum. Nahum was talking about Chicago when he talked about the chariots running to and fro. Well, no, that's not true. If you read the book of Nahum, it clearly identifies Nineveh as the target of that prophecy. But Pentecostalism had this very bad idea, and I can say that with full assurance. It was a bad idea that you could take a word or phrase and you could build a theology on top of it without considering the context of the verses before and the verses after. Because by doing so, you could take any book and you could make the book say anything that you wanted. I could say that Charles was the president last year if I were to take a book that's talking about the president and has the word Charles in it and just read one single sentence. You can make a book say anything that you want if you rip it out of context. And at its core, this question, the different classes of Christians, what it's referring to specifically is different passages with different phrases that were applied to different genres of biblical text. Some were prophecy, some were law, some were poetry. There's different classes of text. And what they have done is these men tried to apply that to the 20th century. And then along comes William Branham, who is picking and choosing different doctrines from different men, many of which were manipulated to believe British Israelism, and then claiming it as divine prophecy or divinely inspired doctrine, when it was just plagiarizing all of this, and at its core, it was false. And so what I'm trying to say is he was building upon false theology to introduce additional false theology. And that's really the core of what this is.
Right, and at the end of the day, this is the root of where all of the elitism ideas of the message come from. We're the bride, or we're the wise virgins, or we're this, that, or the other. That's really what it serves in the message, is to feed into the idea that there is an elite class of Christians, rather than what Paul says, there's neither free nor bond. They introduce this sort of a hierarchy. So very, very strange, really, what they do with this to some extent. And I think the majority of Christianity would find it to be rather bizarre. And the truth is, the only other group of people out there that you're really going to find like that is other groups that have also been influenced by British Israelism. The Jehovah's Witnesses have it to a degree. You'll find it in Christian identity theology. You'll find it among some of the other British Israel groups out there, Herbert Armstrong's groups, for example. These are the only groups out there that have these ideas, really, of a heavenly class system.